What will the college football playoff rankings look like tomorrow night? These are very important rankings because we talked about this yesterday. These rankings are going to tell us who is in line for that final playoff spot, assuming we see SMU win the ACC. If SMU loses to Clemson, then that's going to give us a little bit more intrigue in terms of which teams will get in the college football playoff in those final rankings. But, seeing where the teams are ranked, it's still going to be very interesting to see on Sunday after we go through these conference championship games. So I'm going to give you my projections now for what I think the rankings are going to look like this week. Last week, when they started revealing the rankings, starting at the bottom, like the first 7 or 8 teams, I had right on the money. I was like, am I going to predict every single team right? Then we missed a little bit there in the top 15 or so, but was still pretty accurate. And usually the bottom teams are the ones that are the hardest, but we'll see what it looks like this week. I think it's tough this week because I don't know what they're going to do with some of these spots. This is how I'm projecting it. I've got Duke and Army in those final 2 spots. Again, it could go to Texas A&M or LSU. Those teams have pretty good resumes, even though they have 4 losses. I looked at them. Could Louisville maybe climb back up? And, it's tough. I think Tulane is out after that loss to Memphis. You could make an argument for Memphis to maybe get in, but they've got 2 group of 5 losses. So I think they probably just go with Duke because they've only got 3 losses and Army because they've only got 1 loss. At the end of the day, I think that's what the committee is going to do. We'll see. But that's what I'm projecting right now. Colorado at 23 after a win. They should move up. Illinois should move up after a win. And then UNLV after a win. They should move up as well. And again, UNLV, Boise State in the Mountain West Championship. And the winner of that game will be in the college football playoff. I don't see any scenario where the winner of that game does not get in. I don't think Army, even if they beat Tulane, they're not going to jump ahead of even a UNLV. So, Boise State, UNLV playoff spot on the line in that one. Is there any chance that a UNLV win could get both teams in? Could Boise State stay in the top 12? I don't know if anyone's thought of that. I kind of think Boise State's going to be out because they just don't have that strong of a resume. But that would be interesting. That would be an interesting debate right there because are you going to penalize Boise State for losing in their conference championship game when maybe another team didn't play? That, again, could be very interesting. All right, let's go now to 16 through 20. So I've got Syracuse up to number 20, and I had them ranked last week, the last 2 weeks. I thought they deserved to be ranked. They've got a pretty strong resume. I think the committee will finally get it right this week. We'll see. Again, I think they've been underrating the Syracuse team, but they've got a win over a ranked UNLV team. I think they should be ahead of UNLV because of that win. I think they will be. And now they've got the great win over Miami. That's a top 15 win at least. So maybe even a top 10 or top 11 win, depending on where they rank Miami. And then Georgia Tech's a pretty good win as well. We've seen Georgia Tech play some pretty good football. They took Georgia into 8 overtimes. They beat Miami. So I think you look at those 3 wins, that should be enough, in my opinion, to rank Syracuse. And again, I think they'll be ranked ahead of UNLV. I think Missouri's at 19. They have no resume. They have no quality wins. It's really it's bad. Their wins are just not very good. Now they don't have they really don't have any bad losses. So that's the good news for Missouri, even though they got blown out in some of those games. I think Clemson drops to 18. Very similar to Missouri. They really don't have a resume in terms of wins at all. But the committee bumped them up ahead of those 3-loss SEC teams last week. So I think that's probably where they're going to be. I don't know that Clemson deserves to be ranked this high, though. You're looking at, like, Colorado has better wins than Clemson. So their resume is not very good. Their best win is Pitt, and that's I think a 5-loss team. Clemson does not have very good wins at all. And they've got a loss, really a blowout loss to an unranked Louisville team. So I don't know why Clemson was ranked as high as they were last week. And this is nothing against Clemson. I kind of like Clemson. I think it's going to be a great game in the ACC championship. But just looking at the numbers, look at the resumes, it's just, I don't know why they were ranked that high to begin with. But based off of that, I don't think the committee's going to drop them too much. BYU has that big win over SMU. Also wins over Baylor and Kansas State. Baylor is a very quiet they very quietly went 8-4. Baylor and TCU out of the Big 12. I actually thought about doing a video of teams that quietly made it to 8-4, or maybe even 7-5 and 8-4. But yeah, BYU's got some pretty good wins in there. Iowa State was ahead of BYU last week. That was one of the things I missed. I had BYU ahead of Iowa State, with the committee at Iowa State ahead. I think that will continue this week. So we see Iowa State at 16, BYU at 17. All right, so now this is the important part. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be right or not, but when I started really looking at the resumes, this is how I think the committee, and again, looking at how the committee has ranked these teams in the past, this is how I think these next 5 teams are going to look. And again, this is crucial. Where these teams are ranked is crucial from 11 to 14. I think they're going to go with this. So we'll start with Arizona State at 15. They got another win. They've been rolling. A team with a lot of momentum. I think they move up a little bit. South Carolina. So that's going to be the question mark. Do they jump ahead of Ole Miss or Alabama or both? And then where's Miami? And so this is how I think it's going to look. And let me explain why. First of all, when we compare the 3 SEC teams, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Last week they had Alabama ahead of Ole Miss, so I don't think there's any reason to change that. Is there enough for South Carolina to jump ahead of these 2 teams after their win over Clemson? I don't think so. When you look at their wins, Alabama has a win over Georgia. They have a win over Missouri. They have the win over South Carolina head-to-head, and a win over a 4-loss LSU team. Ole Miss has a win over Georgia. They also beat South Carolina head-to-head. And yes, South Carolina has the advantage in terms of who they lost to. Their losses are to better teams than Alabama and Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost to some pretty bad teams, but they were close games. So it really comes down to the wins versus the losses. If we're going with the wins, I think it goes Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. If we're looking more at the losses, then South Carolina, I think, jumps ahead of Alabama and Ole Miss. But because it's so close, I think it does come down to that head-to-head. And I think that's going to be the difference. I do believe that it will be Alabama, Ole Miss, and then South Carolina. I don't think that win over Clemson is enough for South Carolina to jump ahead of these 2 teams when they don't have head-to-head against either one of them. That's what I think the committee is going to do. And so Duke ahead of Alabama. Again, this is the toughest one for me. I was really back and forth because if you go back a few weeks ago, Miami had 1 loss, Alabama had 2 losses. Alabama was the only 2-loss team ahead of a 1-loss Miami. So you look at that and you think, okay, well, a 3-loss Alabama will probably be ahead of a 2-loss Miami. But what has happened since then? Alabama, I mean, they look really bad against Oklahoma. And you look at Miami's loss to Syracuse. It was on the road, it was a close game, and it was to a Syracuse team that I believe will now be ranked. So if you compare those losses, that is a much worse loss for Alabama than the loss for Miami. So you look at that, and again, 1 fewer loss. I realize Alabama has much better wins, but if you look at the losses, again, that's an advantage for Miami. Georgia Tech is a solid team. I know their record isn't great. They've had a tough schedule. And then you look at Syracuse, who I think is going to be ranked. Alabama has 2 losses to unranked teams, to teams that are 6-6, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. I mean, those are pretty bad losses. Those are worse, I think, than Miami's losses. Yes, Alabama does have the wins over Georgia, South Carolina, Missouri, and LSU. Miami does have a win over a 3-loss Duke, who might be ranked this week. They have a win over a 4-loss Louisville. That win over Florida, I don't know how the committee's looking at that because Florida has finished really strong, but they didn't look great early in the season. So I don't know how the committee's looking at that. I don't know. It's tough, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to go with Miami here because they've only got 2 losses and Alabama has 3. I think that's going to be at the end of the day what decides it. But I would not be surprised at all to see Alabama ahead of Miami. And I wouldn't be shocked if South Carolina is ahead of Miami and Alabama. If they really look at those losses and say, wow, look, South Carolina, bad call against LSU. They played Alabama on the road, had a chance to win that game. You look at the way they played down the stretch. They've really looked good. So there are debates. There are arguments to be made, in my opinion, for Miami, Alabama, and South Carolina. I do not think Ole Miss has a debate here. They don't have an argument, I should say. Because they were behind Alabama last week and they didn't look great against Mississippi State. So they've done nothing to jump ahead of Alabama. So to me, again, it comes down to Miami, Alabama, and South Carolina. I think this is how they're going to rank them. Could be wrong. We'll see. This is what I'm most intrigued about. Next, let's go to 6 through 10. This seems pretty clear to me. Now, I do think Ohio State's at 6. I think I saw maybe some projections that had Tennessee ahead of Ohio State. I don't think that's going to be the case. When you look at, if you compare Ohio State and Tennessee's resumes, it's really not even that close. You look at Ohio State, they've got wins over Penn State and Indiana. Those are top 10 wins. And they also have a win over Iowa, which is a decent win. Tennessee's best win is Alabama. Their next best win is Florida. They lost to a 6-6 Arkansas team. Ohio State's, their bad loss is to Michigan, but Ohio State also lost, and Michigan is not a bad team, and they're a 7-5 team. To me, that's a much better loss than the Arkansas loss. And then their other loss came to the number 1 team in the country, the only undefeated team in the country. So I think Ohio State clearly will be ranked ahead of Tennessee. I don't see any way to justify ranking Tennessee ahead of Ohio State. In fact, I think Ohio State could be ranked ahead of Georgia, but I think Georgia does win the day there because you look at their losses. They were to ranked teams. They were both on the road. So I think Georgia does wind up at 5. They've also got very good wins. It's close, but I think Georgia does get ahead of Ohio State. Notre Dame at 4, Penn State at 3, Texas at 2, Oregon at 1. These teams all move up. This one's pretty obvious. I think the top 5 is crystal clear. And again, I think the top 10 is pretty clear. It really, the questions I have is where do they go again with Miami, Alabama, and South Carolina? That's going to be the story to watch this week. Oregon, by the way, I mean, are we giving this team enough credit? As crazy as this season has been, as many upsets as we have seen, this Oregon team, the only team in college football in the FBS to go undefeated. They have wins over probably this week, top 10 teams. 2 of them. They have a win over a top 25 Illinois team. They have a win over a Michigan team that's 7-5 and just beat Ohio State. I realize outside of those 4 opponents, they didn't play a very tough schedule, but they did play those 4 games, and they didn't trip up. They won all of them. So I think we all need to really acknowledge Oregon and what they have done this regular season. Even if they don't win the national championship, what they have done this regular season, going 12-0, is a huge accomplishment. So hats off to Oregon. Great season for the Ducks, and they have a chance to go to 13-0 with a win over Penn State in the Big Ten Championship. But that's how I think the rankings are going to look this week. Don't feel confident on that Miami, Alabama, South Carolina, where they're ranked. I don't feel super confident on that, but this is my best guess based off of what this committee has done so far this season. Give me your thoughts. How do you think those teams will be ranked? Let me know down in the comments below.